Keep riding with us as we continue to broadcast the balance and defend the discourse from the Hip Hop Weekly studios. This is Civic Cypher. I am your host, Ramses Job. Big shout out to my man, Q Ward, who is out of town for this taping, but have no fear. Dr. Camilla Westenberg is here to hold down the co-captain chair for the evening, afternoon, morning, whatever time of day you are consuming this media. Be sure to stick around because we have a lot more in store for you. We are going to be discussing a one Johnny Hollman who lost his life at the hands of police in a very violent and unnecessary way. And we need to give you some insight into this particular incident because this is not white cop, black suspect. This is a black officer. And there are some implications there we need to discuss. But before we get there, let's discuss BABA, Becoming a Better Ally Baba. Today's Baba is sponsored by Friends of the Movement. You can sign up for the free voter wallet from FOTMglobal.com to support Black businesses and allied businesses, as well as make an impact with your spending. Again, that is FOTMglobal.com. So today, reading that Megan Button's family was considering moving if their Pennsylvania school district didn't change course. This is from NPR, by the way. She normally isn't politically active, she said, but felt compelled to volunteer when a slate of Democrats launched bids to take back their school board in Central Bucks School District, just north of Philadelphia. Central Bucks is well known, both statewide and nationally, for heated board meetings over masks and pride flags, policies banning certain books, and directives to not use students' preferred names and pronouns. Accusations of discrimination against LGBTQ students have also led to an ongoing investigation by the U.S. Department of Education. Quote, "I couldn't have my kids in a school district where these kinds of things were happening," Budden said. Standing in the Bucks County Democratic headquarters on election night, Budden sobbed when the results rolled in. Democrats took all 5 seats up for election. The room erupted in cheers. Friends, neighbors, and strangers hugged. Quote, "It was very moving and very joyous feeling from everyone," Budden recalled, and a sense of relief. If there was a question about whether the conservative-led school board's policies reflected the will of the local community, Tuesday's election may have provided an answer. And so, we often ask for you to use these examples to model your life after or to take action if there's a fundraising initiative or anything like that. And the highest good I believe that any of us can do is hold elected office. And of course, Megan Button is an example of that. So shout out to her. Okay, so next topic. How you feeling?
Good.
Okay.
I'm good.
I appreciate you being here.
Where was Bucks School where was it located again?
I believe that was Central Bucks in Philadelphia.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about a video that we are going to play a little bit later. I'm going to read a little bit, but I want you to be caught up to speed. Yeah. What we're going to witness is, I'm going to play the audio, but the audio by itself is not very clear because the speaking voice and the cadence and the accent of Mr. Johnny Hollman, who is now deceased, is not, he does not speak with what we in the radio industry call non-regional diction. It's a very thick Southern accent, and he speaks very quickly. So you might not be able to make out what he's saying, but hopefully you'll be able to feel his energy when we get there. I'm going to share a bit. This comes from NBC News. The daughter of Johnny Hollman said she became physically ill watching body camera footage of the 62-year-old church deacon screaming out for help and repeatedly saying he could not breathe during a fatal encounter with an Atlanta police officer. Hollman died on August 10th after former officer Kieran Kimbrough used a stun gun on him and then handcuffed him following a minor traffic incident. Died after a minor traffic incident. And when we talk about police this is a show that is very critical of the way that policing as an institution is done. I know individual officers, police officers, kind people, good people, well-intentioned, well-meaning people who are a part of a system that desperately needs reform.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I want to make sure that I say that here. Okay, so yeah, Kimbrough was fired by the Atlanta Police Department because he did not follow standard operating procedures, police said Tuesday. Okay. Arnitra Follins, her family, and their attorney met with the city last month to view footage of the incident. Again, this is the daughter of the deceased, Johnny Hollman. Quote, "It was very heartbreaking," Follins said Wednesday. Her father had called her during the encounter. I'm not going to play the whole video, but there is a moment when he's trying to make a phone call. I think there was a couple of moments actually, but toward the end, the officers says, "Sign this ticket," and he's older man. He's trying to work his phone, and the officer becomes impatient. Mr. Hollman says, "I'm going to sign the ticket," and the officer by then is very frustrated and starts to grab him to place him under arrest. And he says, "Wait, I said I'd sign the ticket." And then by then the officer has escalated and obviously he lost his life. Okay. But he did call his daughter during the encounter. So you won't be able to see that if you're listening to this on the audio. Relatives said that Hollman was driving home from Bible study. Wow. At a daughter's house and taking dinner to his wife when he was involved in a car accident. He called police to the scene, the family said. The Atlanta Police Department said in its initial statement that Hollman became, quote, agitated and uncooperative when the officer found him to be the at-fault driver and issued him a citation. Authorities said he, quote, resisted as the officer attempted to take him into custody and a struggle ensued. After several minutes of struggling, the officer used his stun gun and then placed Hollman in handcuffs, according to the police. It was then that the officer realized that Hollman was unresponsive and requested EMS. So, again, I want you to know that the officer in this was black, and of course, Johnny Hollman was black as well. So we're not. Sometimes we get a chance to illustrate how the system is, and there's a component of racism often in the system and in the officer as well. But even without that component of racism, a system will still compel you to engage in racist behaviors, to mistreat people. Remember, once upon a time, slavery was legal in this country, and freed black people could own slaves too. And they did because that was the economic model. And so what we're going to look at is something that is not dissimilar to that, a black officer engaged in what we believe to be a white supremacist institution. I believe that it's more than a belief. That is an objective fact. It was founded as slave patrol, so it is a
everyday life. Right.
So let's get to this video, and then we will talk about it. I feel compelled to mention that this comes from the Daily Mail. It has been sort of edited a bit, so you'll hear music and things like that. That's not my doing, but for the most part of all the videos, this one, it seems to be the most intact and appropriate for today's show. So here we go.
Okay, I'm not right away. All right, I did find you at fault.
This started off as a simple conversation, which ended up with tragic consequences.
My fault. I was in the red light. My light was green. You cut your turn short. No, I didn't turn. I don't know why. What it did. He kept coming at me. It was my fault. Why are you screaming at me? I'm not screaming. I'm saying it was not my fault. He ran into my truck. Okay. You see right here.
62-year-old church deacon Johnny Hollman got into an altercation with a police officer in Atlanta after a vehicle went into his pickup truck.
I told you once, lower your voice. You're not going to scream at me. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Now you're going to sign this ticket, and I'm going to take you to jail. I suggest you sign the ticket. Then you can talk to my sergeant or whoever you want to talk to, your priest, your wife, I don't care. But you're going to sign it right here. Here you go.
When Hollman refuses to sign a citation, the situation quickly escalates.
Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Sign the ticket.
So you
Sign the ticket.
you're trying to make
Sign the ticket.
So I'm not guilty.
Sign the ticket.
That's what you're trying to make me say.
Sign the ticket.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm
Sign
sorry.
the ticket.
I'm sorry.
Sign the ticket. Sign the ticket.
How can I sign? Think you look at that now? Like,
You're acting crazy.
I'm not doing nothing.
Give me your arm.
I'm right here.
Give me your arm.
I'm right here.
Give me your arm.
My body already hurts, man.
All right.
I'm already.
Another unit.
All right, I know you can't see what's going on, but basically he's telling the officer that he needs to know whether or not signing this is an admission of guilt. The officer seems to be frustrated. We can't see the officer, of course, and then they're now struggling. He's saying that he's hurting. The officer's hurting his arm. That's what we're witnessing right now.
Sadly, Hollman was pronounced dead at the hospital after the incident, which took place on August 10th.
Okay, so let's discuss. So one of the things that you may not have heard from the audio is him saying, I'm going to sign the ticket.
Yeah.
Another thing that he said was, I'm an old man.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that he said that in a way to kind of
Mm-hmm.
de-escalate the situation. In other words, I mean you no harm. Another thing that he said, again, I have captions here so I can read what he's saying in the studio, but if you're just listening to the audio, you may not know. Part of the reason why he was hesitating when it came to signing the ticket is because he was worried that it might be an admission of guilt. And obviously he felt like he wasn't at fault.
Yeah.
And the officer did not respond to that inquiry. In other words, a lot of times you might receive a ticket and the officer will say, this is not an admission of guilt or innocence. This is simply a signing to say that you've received the ticket. You can plead whether or not you're guilty or innocent at court. And so he was asking that question when the officer started to grab him. He was saying, I'm an old man. I'm hurting. I can't breathe. You know, all these things. And of course, he died there on the sidewalk. So I wanted to bring you up to speed. Of course, I'd like for you to jump in here. Your thoughts, Dr. Westenberg.
Well, actually, I go back to the very beginning, to the reporting of the incident and the newscaster, if I heard it correctly. He says that Johnny Hollman got into an altercation with a police officer. Now, or perhaps the police officer got into an altercation with him.
That's what it seems like.
Okay. So I say, first, it's for me somewhat tainted because a decision has been made by the presentation of the story by the media to that audience. The other thing that I found really interesting is that I heard no inquiry about where you're coming from. What are you doing? Let's get this into perspective. What's the big picture? And he said he hit me, and I didn't see any in that where attention was given to, let's look at this. I don't know if he pointed to the back of his car or to the side of his car. I did not hear any verbiage that said anything about where that hitting, where the contact took place.
Sure.
Okay.
Well,
and he did not give attention to what he said. He said he hit me. So let's look at that situation. And where is the other? Let's walk over. I don't see any investigation of what actually occurred.
Right.
And then he called his daughter. It's reasonable that someone would want to let a family member know what's taking place. That's just simply not unusual. And he said he was going to sign it. He said, I'm going to sign it. Give him a moment. Just you first, evidently an incident has occurred between two cars. That within itself is a little unsettling.
Traumatic,
Should have
sure.
been on both parts. Recognize that, okay? You have to give a person time to settle down, come to grips with it, and not rush them through the process. This gentleman may not have ever been in a situation before with police. So, look, he's a deacon.
He
He's
was
just
leaving
come
Bible
from,
study.
he had been to Bible study,
he was
okay?
coming home.
You know, did the policeman, where are you coming from? Where have you been? You know, he just went bam right into the situation and started. Yeah. And here you have this person with a personality and a persona, and he knows who he is as an individual. And the policeman does not take any time in the dialogue to deal with that.
Sure.
Or even when he said he hit me, to investigate that. You know, what you were just talking about, explaining that it doesn't indicate guilt or not. To have said that would have been delightful too, for him to have shared that with him.
Right.
Sir, I just want to let you know that this is just a process that we have to go through. Okay. But instead, you go and get a stun gun. That simply just does not make sense.
You know, there's something else here. When we're looking at this story, and indeed the story from the first part of the show, what we have are traumatic events that officers, if they're not trained to deal with them, they certainly, there's a prevalence of them because they are the ones that are responding to traumatic events. And so you would reasonably assume that they could deal with trauma better than the average person.
Exactly.
Tense moments, I'll say. In the first example, from the first part of the show, where the woman was handcuffed naked on her in her living room as a result of a no-knock warrant, who lived alone, older Black woman, she kept begging to call somebody.
She says, I feel uncomfortable.
Right. And of course, then we see Mr. Johnny Hollman pull out his phone to make a call as well. And my guess is that if I was in a similar situation, I would want someone to know too.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that sentiment is shared, particularly among Black people, because situations can get very dangerous very quickly. Tense situations, I would argue, are more tense if you are Black with respect to police interactions, right? And so what we see when we talk about systemic elements, systemic oppression, systemic entities in our society, systems have a tendency to treat things like one size fits all. No knock warrants get the bad guys, completely ignoring the fact that we're going to kill a ton of people that have nothing to do with their names not on the warrant. They don't have anything to do with it. We're going to make mistakes. Whatever. The collateral damage is just collateral damage. And because officers are often empowered by communities that do not feel that additional tension, they're blindly supported. The flag, that abomination of the American flag where it's black and white and then there's a blue strip. There are people out there that just thinks that police can do no wrong. And, you know, we talk about it on social media time and again, that systems and indeed individual actors create trauma that ripples through the Black community. I feel like you want to jump in, please.
Well, you know, I would just say it's human. Well, I won't say it's human nature, but it often occurs that whenever a person is fortunate enough to have a superior role over other individuals, oftentimes it goes to the head. This is outside of being in the policeman or in that field. And that particular area is at the hierarchy of it. I mean, whether it's on the job or wherever you might be, if someone, an organization, in or committee, in any of those instances where you are over, sometimes you have the capacity to assume that role in an exaggerated fashion.
Sure, exactly. That's it.
For a police officer, that is the ultimate. You are given the car, the lights to stop. You
The badge
are given
and the
everything, right? And that's something that has to be realized, which means that a concerted effort should be made. I mean, just think, you're driving down the road and you see a light coming behind you.
Mhm.
Your heart starts pounding.
Oh, it's over.
You start looking and saying, am I doing everything? Am I doing everything right? You know, what have I done?
Sure.
And it passes you and you go.
Yeah. And I want, for our listeners, real quick, I want to say for our listeners, I know that everybody experiences this.
Yes.
But again, imagine how much more intense that feels.
Yeah.
When you're Black. Again,
Yeah.
Briefly before we close, I want to share this. I come from Compton, California. My first years were in a place in the 80s, of course, where there was drugs and all kind of stuff, right? Very scary place. The scariest of all was the police. The scariest of all. And that has been true. I've seen police hurt people, like unnecessarily so. Remember, people were talking about how bad the LAPD were. That's a real thing. I saw it happen with these eyes as a child. And so that trauma, that fear of police and the police being empowered to do whatever they want without having to deal with that kind of contributes to this weird predicament that we find ourselves in. But let's leave it right there. Okay. As always, we never have enough time with this show. But please do us a favor, check our social media at Civic Cypher. What you'll find is both of these videos so you can see for yourself. CIVIC, CIPHER. I, of course, would like to thank you, Dr. Westenberg, for coming as always. And
it's a wonderful, wonderful show.
Sure. And I appreciate you having these conversations with me and having these conversations with me since I was 19 years old in college.
Good around.
I am glad to have been raised by you in this tradition. Do us a favor, please hit the website civiccypher.com. Download this and any previous episodes. Again, as I mentioned, follow us on social media. You can hit me at Ramses Ja. Q is I am Q Ward. He will be back next week, and until then, peace.